Mountain Man won her in a card game from her father, but he loved her. A mountain man won her in a card game from her father. But what he did next left the whole town whispering. In a smoky saloon, where debts are paid in whiskey and sin, one desperate man lays down his last wager, his own daughter. The cards fall silent. The mountain man takes her, not as property, but to save her from the shame her father brought. But out in those cold Colorado hills, mercy comes at a price. The law rides after him, the railroad wants him silenced, and the girl he rescued carries secrets that could destroy them both. As snow buries the past, fire and bullets will test what love truly means. In a land where men buy souls and sell promises, can one broken man prove that love can't be won in a game, but only given? Or will his act of mercy cost them both everything? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The heavy door of Bear Gulch's saloon creaked open, letting in a blast of cold mountain air. Caleb Harwood ducked his head under the low doorframe, shaking snow from his worn leather coat. The familiar sense of tobacco smoke and stale whiskey wrapped around him like an old blanket. He hadn't planned to stop here, but the incoming storm had forced his hand before heading to the high country. Oil lamps cast yellow light across rough-hewn tables where men hunched over cards and whiskey glasses. The floorboards, sticky with spilled drink, groaned under Caleb's boots as he made his way to the bar. He ordered his usual 1 finger of whiskey and found an empty chair at a quiet table. "Deal me in," he said softly, setting down a small stack of coins. The dealer nodded, cards whispering across the green felt. At the far wall, a young woman sat alone, her dark hair tucked beneath a simple bonnet. Anna Talbot kept her eyes down, hands folded in her lap, trying to fade into the shadows. Caleb had seen her before at church socials, always quiet, always watching her father with worried eyes. Speaking of the devil, Zeke Talbot stumbled in from the back room, his gaunt face flushed with drink and desperation. His once fine coat hung loose on his frame, telling the story of how far the respected rancher had fallen. "Got room for one more?" Zeke slurred, dropping heavily into an empty chair. His shaking hands counted out a meager pile of coins. The cards fell, round after round. Caleb played carefully, neither winning big nor losing much. But Zeke bet wild, chasing losses with increasingly reckless wagers. The pile of coins before him dwindled rapidly. "All in," Zeke announced, pushing his last silver dollar forward. His bloodshot eyes darted around the table. "And I ain't done yet." "You're out of coin, Talbot," the dealer said flatly. "Time to call it a night." "Got something better than coin." Zeke jerked his thumb toward Anna. "My girl? There. Worth more than money, she is." The saloon went quiet. Caleb's hand tightened around his glass. "That ain't right," he said, his voice low but firm. "My property to wager as I please," Zeke snarled. He turned to the dealer. "Well?" The dealer looked between Zeke and Anna, then shrugged. "If the table accepts..." Caleb's stomach turned, but he saw the fear in Anna's eyes. If he walked away, what would happen to her? At least he could offer her safety, dignity. The cards came out. Zeke's hands trembled as he lifted his. A wheezing laugh escaped him as he laid them down. 3 kings. But Caleb's steady fingers revealed 4 nines. Coarse laughter erupted around them. Zeke lurched to his feet, knocking over his chair. "Take her then," he spat. "Ain't worth feeding anyway." Caleb stood slowly, gathering his winnings with deliberate care. He approached Anna, who sat frozen, color drained from her face. "Miss Talbot," he said quietly, "you go with me. but not as any man's property. You'll have my protection, nothing more." She looked up at him then, searching his face. Whatever she found there made her shoulders straighten slightly. Caleb shrugged out of his heavy coat and draped it around her shoulders. They stepped out into the swirling snow. The street was empty, the storm having driven everyone inside. Caleb led Anna to where his mule stood patiently at the hitching post. "Can you ride?" he asked. When she nodded, he helped her up, then mounted behind her. The mule's hooves crunched in the fresh snow as they headed north, toward the timbered ridges where Caleb's cabin waited. Neither spoke during the long ride. The falling snow muffled all sound except the mule's steady breathing and the creak of leather. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the lights of Bear Gulch disappeared behind them. By sundown, they reached the small clearing where Caleb's cabin stood. Smoke curled from the stone chimney. His neighbor must have tended the fire as promised. The cabin's single window glowed with welcoming warmth. Caleb helped Anna dismount, her movements stiff from the cold ride. He led the mule into the lean-to stable, then showed Anna into the cabin. The shame of the night seemed to fade in the simple, clean space, replaced by the deep silence of the mountain peaks. The fire's warmth reached out to them, but an invisible wall of awkwardness remained between them. Both knew their lives had changed forever in that saloon, but neither yet understood exactly how. For now, they could only wait as the snow fell outside, blanketing the world in white silence. The pale morning light seeped through the narrow gaps between the cabin logs, painting thin stripes across the plank floor. Anna woke to the steady rhythm of an axe splitting wood outside. She lay still for a moment on the small cot Caleb had prepared for her, listening to the familiar sound that reminded her of calmer days. Rising quietly, she wrapped a borrowed quilt around her shoulders and moved about the cabin's single room. In daylight, she could better see Caleb's few possessions. Everything had its place: tools hung with care on pegs, tin cups lined neatly on a shelf, a worn Bible resting on a small table by the window. Next to it lay a faded shawl, carefully folded. The delicate pattern spoke of a woman's touch, and Anna's heart tightened with understanding. This had belonged to his wife. The coffee pot bubbled on the wood stove, its aroma mixing with the crisp scent of fresh-cut pine drifting in from outside. Anna found a cup and poured herself some, warming her hands around the tin. Through the window, she watched Caleb's steady movements as he split log after log, his breath clouding in the cold air. When he came inside, snow dusting his shoulders, he nodded a quiet good morning. "Reckon we should talk," he said, pouring his own coffee. He settled into a chair by the stove, leaving comfortable space between them. "You can stay here long as you need, Miss Talbot, until you figure your path." Anna's hands tightened around her cup. "What work do you expect of me?" Caleb looked up, surprise crossing his weathered features. "None. Just keep yourself warm and fed. That's all I ask." "But surely—" "You ain't property, Miss Talbot. What happened in that saloon?" He shook his head. "It ain't right, but it brought you to safety. That's all that matters now." Outside, snow began falling again, thick flakes that soon obscured the distant peaks. The storm settled in for days, wrapping the cabin in white silence. Caleb spent the mornings hunting, bringing back elk meat and firewood. Each time he left, he made sure Anna knew where he kept the rifle and how to use it if needed. "Probably won't see anybody up here," he told her, "but better you know how to protect yourself." The days fell into a gentle rhythm. Anna found herself relaxing into the cabin's quiet order. During the long afternoons, while Caleb worked in his lean-to stable, she noticed his coat hanging by the door, torn in several places. Without asking, she began to mend it, her needle moving in small, careful stitches. Each evening, as darkness gathered outside their windows, Caleb would open his Bible. His rough voice grew soft as he read by lamplight, sometimes catching on verses about mercy and forgiveness. Anna found herself looking forward to these moments, watching his strong hands turn the pages with unexpected gentleness. A week passed this way, marked by snowfall and scripture, shared meals and comfortable silences. On the 7th evening, they sat down to a supper of elk stew and cornbread. The lamp cast warm light across the table as Caleb bowed his head to pray. "Lord," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "we thank you for this food, for shelter from the storm, and for—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "For a second chance neither of us earned." That night, lying on her cot, Anna's thoughts turned to her father. She remembered him as he once was, proud, hard-working, a man of respect. The gambling had taken hold slowly, like frost creeping across a window pane. She'd watched him change, watched the brightness leave his eyes, replaced by a desperate hunger that no amount of winning could satisfy. In her dreams, she saw him at that last table, cards trembling in his hands as he wagered away his own daughter. But now the dream shifted, showing him kneeling in prayer like Caleb, asking for forgiveness. Was there redemption for men like her father? The question followed her into uneasy sleep. When she woke, the cabin felt different. What had first seemed like a prison now stood as a sanctuary. The neat tools, the well-swept floor, the carefully tended fire. Everything spoke of Caleb's quiet decency. Even the snow outside felt less threatening, more like a protective blanket drawing them away from the world's harsh judgments. Anna rose and went to the window, watching morning light sparkle on fresh snow. Behind her, she heard Caleb stirring, readying for another day. The coffee pot already bubbled on the stove, filling the cabin with its familiar warmth. 3 days passed in peaceful routine, until the quiet morning shattered. Hoofbeats echoed through the snowy timber, the sound carrying sharp and clear in the winter air. Caleb set down his coffee cup, every muscle tensing as he moved to the window. Through the frost-edged glass, he spotted 3 riders approaching through the trees. "Stay back from the window," he told Anna softly, reaching for his coat. The familiar weight of his hunting knife pressed against his ribs as he opened the cabin door. The riders emerged from the trees, a U.S. Marshal flanked by 2 deputies, their badges catching the weak winter sun. The Marshal sat tall in his saddle, a gray-haired man with hard eyes and a face lined by years of pursuing men across rough country. Caleb recognized him, Ephraim Gage, known for bringing in his quarry dead more often than alive. "Harwood," Gage called out, his voice carrying the authority of his office. "Step out where we can see both your hands." Caleb complied, moving slowly onto the porch. Fresh snow crunched under his boots. "Marshal Gage, long ride up from Bear Gulch in this weather. Wouldn't have made it except for bad business." Gage dismounted, his spurs ringing against the frozen ground. "Zeke Talbot's dead." The words fell heavy as stones in the morning quiet. Behind Caleb, he heard Anna's sharp intake of breath from inside the cabin. "Found him yesterday," Gage continued. "Shot in the back by his ranch fence. Mighty interesting timing, considering witnesses saw you with him the night before at McClintock's saloon." "We played cards," Caleb said evenly. "Nothing more." "Cards." Gage's mouth twisted. "Where you won his daughter off him, if I hear right." His cold gaze shifted to the cabin door. "That the girl in there?" Before Caleb could answer, Anna stepped onto the porch. She wore Caleb's late wife's shawl against the cold, her face pale but composed. "I'm right here, Marshal, and Mr. Harwood never hurt anyone." "Ma'am." Gage touched the brim of his hat, but his eyes remained suspicious. "Seems mighty peculiar, a respectable woman staying alone with a stranger after such a transaction." "He saved me from shame," Anna said, her voice trembling but firm, while others just watched and laughed. One of the deputies shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Sleet began to fall, hissing against the pine needles. "Well," Gage said, "those railroad men circling your pa's ranch want someone blamed fast. Land disputes get mighty ugly without a proper suspect." He fixed Caleb with a hard stare. "You've got 1 week to ride down to Bear Gulch for questioning. Make it easy on yourself." "And if I don't?" Caleb asked quietly. Gage's hand rested casually near his holster. "Then we come back with more men. Your choice how this plays out, Harwood." The marshal and his deputies wheeled their horses around, leaving fresh tracks in the new snow. Their hoofbeats faded into the timber, but the threat lingered like gun smoke in still air. Inside the cabin, Caleb stoked the fire while Anna stood by the window, watching sleet pattern the glass. Neither spoke for a long moment. "What will you do?" she finally asked. Caleb sat heavily in his chair, staring into the flames. "Could head north into the high country. Winter would cover our tracks." "Our tracks?" Anna turned from the window. "You'd need to come too. They'd question you hard if I ran." "Then we face them together," she said firmly. "I won't let you face them alone." Caleb looked up, surprised by the steel in her voice. "It's not your fight." "My father is dead," she said softly, "and you're the only person who's shown me real kindness since he started gambling. I know you didn't kill him." The sleet drummed harder on the roof as darkness gathered early. Caleb lit the lantern, its warm glow pushing back the shadows. Together they began gathering provisions: dried meat, cornmeal, coffee, ammunition. Anna folded the few clothes she had, while Caleb checked his rifle and saddle. "We'll leave at first light," he said, rolling blankets into tight bundles. "Town's 3 days' ride in good weather. This storm might slow us some." Anna nodded, tucking her father's Bible into her bundle. Her hands shook slightly, but her voice was steady. "I trust you, Mr. Harwood. Whatever comes in Bear Gulch, we'll face it together." The lantern light caught the determination in her eyes, and Caleb felt something shift in his chest, a warmth he hadn't known since his wife died. Whatever waited for them in the valley below, he knew he wouldn't face it alone. Dawn painted the mountain peaks in pale gold as Caleb and Anna prepared to leave the cabin. Frost sparkled on every pine needle, and their breath clouded in the bitter morning air. Caleb secured their provisions on his sturdy mule, checking each strap with careful fingers. "Trail's gonna be treacherous," he said, helping Anna mount. He wrapped his thickest blanket around her shoulders, tucking it close against the cold. "Hold tight to the saddle horn." The descent began slowly, with Caleb leading the mule on foot. Ice crusted the narrow trail, making each step precarious. The animal picked its way carefully, steam rising from its flanks despite the chill. Through the morning, they wound down through stands of snow-laden pine and past granite outcrops where icicles hung like crystal spears. By midday, deep drifts blocked their path. Caleb broke trail, sinking sometimes to his thighs in the snow. The mule followed in his tracks, Anna swaying gently with each careful step. Neither spoke much. The effort of the journey and the weight of what waited below kept them quiet. They made camp that first night in a sheltered hollow, sharing dried meat and coffee. Anna insisted on taking watch while Caleb got some rest, her father's rifle across her lap. He wanted to refuse, but the quiet strength in her eyes stopped him. He slept fitfully, waking often to check on her still-formed silhouette against the starlit snow. The second day brought them down to lower elevations where the drifts thinned. By evening, they reached a half-frozen creek, its dark water gurgling between sheets of ice. They made camp among a stand of cottonwoods, their bare branches creaking in the night wind. After their simple supper, Anna knelt in the snow, her hands clasped before her. "Dear Lord," she whispered, her voice carrying in the still air, "watch over my father's soul. Whatever his sins, whatever drove him to such desperate acts, I pray you show him mercy." Caleb stood apart, his hat in his hands, humbled by her capacity for grace. Here was this woman, betrayed and wagered away by her own father, still praying for his salvation. It stirred something deep in his chest, a yearning for that kind of faith, that ability to choose love over bitterness. The third day's journey brought them within sight of Bear Gulch. Thin columns of wood smoke rose from chimneys, hanging in the cold afternoon air. Anna sat straighter in the saddle as they approached, her chin lifted despite the hostile stares that greeted them. Townspeople stopped in the street to watch them pass. Women pulled their children closer, men muttered behind raised hands. Caleb heard snippets of their whispers. "Killed him for the girl, and ain't natural, and ought to be ashamed." They rode straight to the marshal's office, where Gage waited on the porch, his deputies flanking him. Without a word, Caleb helped Anna down, then unstrapped his rifle and handed it over. Inside, the office smelled of wood smoke and coffee gone cold. Caleb recounted the night of the card game in detail. The other players, every hand dealt, Zeke's desperate final wager. Anna stood beside him, confirming each point of his story. "I was there," she said firmly. "Mr. Harwood tried to stop my father's foolishness. When he couldn't, he chose to protect me instead." But Gage's expression remained skeptical. "Mighty convenient story," he drawled. "Man loses everything, turns up dead, and you two ride off together into the hills." Before either could respond, the office door opened, bringing a blast of cold air and Pastor Nathaniel Wainwright. The slight bespectacled man stepped inside, removing his hat. "Marshal," he said quietly, "I couldn't help but overhear. The church has a spare room, warm, private. Perhaps Miss Talbot and Mr. Harwood could stay there while you conduct your investigation. Surely better than the jail cells." Gage frowned, but nodded slowly. "Keep them close at hand, at least. They don't leave town without my say-so." The pastor led them to the white-painted church at the edge of town. Evening bells began to toll as they entered, the sound echoing off the bare walls. While Wainwright showed Caleb to the room, Anna knelt in one of the empty pews. "Lord," she whispered, her words barely stirring the quiet air, "let the truth find light." The last rays of sun filtered through the church's windows, painting patterns on the wooden floor. Outside, the town's whispers continued. But in here, for a moment at least, there was peace. The parsonage attached to Pastor Wainwright's church was small but warm, its wooden walls heated by a constant hearth fire. Over the next several days, Caleb and Anna fell into a quiet routine alongside the pastor's work. A fever had swept through Bear Gulch, leaving many children bedridden and parents desperate for help. Anna spent her mornings in the makeshift infirmary the pastor had set up in the church basement. She moved from cot to cot, pressing cool cloths to burning foreheads and coaxing weak children to sip broth. One boy, no more than 8 years old, seemed especially ill. His small chest rattled with each breath, and his mother watched helplessly as Anna tended to him. "You've got a gentle touch," the mother said one afternoon, as Anna helped her son drink water. "Some folks been saying unkind things, but I see what you really are." Anna's cheeks flushed, but she kept her focus on the sick child. She'd heard the whispers in town. The card girl, they called her, speaking just loud enough for her to hear as she passed. But here, among the sick and suffering, such cruel words seemed to fade away. Meanwhile, Caleb threw himself into repair work around the church grounds. The winter had been hard on the fence line, leaving posts loose and rails splintered. He worked steadily through the days, the rhythm of hammer on nails drowning out his worried thoughts. Pastor Wainwright brought him water and conversation, never pressing, but always present. One afternoon, Caleb walked to the blacksmith's shop, hoping to borrow tools for the fence work. As he approached, he heard raised voices from inside. Through the open door, he recognized two railroad men arguing over papers spread across a workbench. "Talbot's signatures don't match," one said, jabbing at a document. "These deeds won't hold up if anyone looks close." "Don't matter now," the other replied. "Dead men can't testify about their own writing." Caleb stepped back into the shadows, his heart pounding. He waited until the men left, then approached the blacksmith, who looked uncomfortable. "Them papers," Caleb said quietly. "They about the grazing land south of town?" The blacksmith nodded slowly. "Land that was promised to the Apache families years back. Railroad's been trying to claim it, but Zeke's ranch sat right in the middle. Now he's gone." He left the rest unsaid. That evening, Caleb returned to find Anna kneeling before the parsonage hearth, her hands clasped in prayer. The firelight caught the tears on her cheeks. She looked up as he entered, quickly wiping her eyes. "Do you think," she asked softly, "there's forgiveness for men like my father? For gamblers and liars who hurt the ones they should protect?" Caleb removed his hat, turning it slowly in his hands. Outside, the evening snow was beginning to melt, dripping steadily from the eaves. "I reckon God does what men can't," he said finally. "Sees past the sin to the soul beneath." Anna nodded, and they sat together in grateful silence, watching the flames dance. The warmth seemed to wash away the day's troubles, the whispers, the suspicions, the growing weight of unseen forces moving against them. Through the window, they could see the first signs of spring's return. The snow was retreating, revealing patches of dark earth beneath. New buds appeared on the church's apple trees, tiny promises of life, returning after the long winter. But their peace was short-lived. As they prepared for supper, Pastor Wainwright arrived with a telegram in hand. His face was grave as he handed it to Caleb. "From Marshal Gage," he said quietly. "There's to be a land hearing next week." Caleb read the message, his jaw tightening at the marshal's precise handwriting. Each carefully formed letter seemed to carry hidden threat. He passed the telegram to Anna, who read it with steady eyes. "This isn't just about my father's death anymore, is it?" she asked. Caleb shook his head slowly. "No, ma'am. I reckon it's about something much bigger than that." They shared a look of understanding. The melting snow outside might herald spring's return, but darker storms were gathering. This summons was just the beginning, and they both knew their trial was far from over. The way station cabin crouched against dark pines, its single window glowing amber in the dusk. Caleb secured the horses while Anna and Pastor Wainwright carried supplies inside. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and dried herbs, with bundles of sage hanging from rough-hewn rafters. They found gray elk already there, sitting quietly by the stone hearth. His weathered face caught the firelight as he nodded in greeting. Though his black hair showed streaks of silver, his eyes remained sharp and knowing. He wore a mixture of tribal and settler clothing, buckskin leggings beneath a wool coat, with a silver cross at his throat. "The path to truth is never straight," he said as they settled around the fire. His voice carried the weight of years spent bridging two worlds. Like game trails through mountain passes, it winds where others cannot see. Anna prepared coffee in silence, but her hands trembled slightly as she passed out tin cups. When Gray Elk heard her surname, his expression shifted. "Talbot," he said slowly. "I knew your father when his heart was still true to the land." Anna's fingers tightened around her cup. "You knew my father?" Gray Elk nodded, his eyes distant with memory. "Many seasons ago, when drought burned the valleys, he came to our people. We showed him the hidden springs, taught him how to read the sky for rain. In return, he promised our herds could graze his northern pastures." He paused, watching the flames dance. "But when the railroad men came with their paper promises and silver coins, he forgot his word to us." Pastor Wainwright leaned forward. "The same men who now claim his land?" "The same." Gray Elk's voice carried no anger, only sadness. "They spoke of progress but brought only greed. Your father resisted at first," he told Anna gently. "But they found his weakness in cards and whiskey, used his debts like ropes to bind him." Caleb watched Anna's face in the firelight. Tears glistened in her eyes, but she held herself straight, refusing to break. Gray Elk turned to Caleb, his gaze intense. "The white men want your silence, not your truth. They will offer gold to keep their lies hidden." "I ain't for sale," Caleb said quietly. "No," Gray Elk agreed, "but that makes you dangerous to them." They slept uneasily that night, the wind whispering through pine boughs like restless spirits. At dawn, they mounted up and continued toward the county seat, the morning sun painting the eastern sky blood red. The county courthouse rose above the dusty streets like a temple of justice, its wooden columns freshly whitewashed. Inside, the land clerk's office smelled of ink and leather-bound records. The clerk, a thin man with ink-stained fingers, laid out several deeds across his desk. "These show clear transfer of title," he said, adjusting his spectacles. "Signed and witnessed proper." Caleb studied the documents, his jaw tightening. The signatures looked right at first glance, but something felt wrong. He'd seen Zeke's shaking hand that night at cards. These signatures were too steady, too precise. "When were these signed?" Pastor Wainwright asked. The clerk shuffled through papers. 3 days before Mr. Talbot's unfortunate passing." "The night he lost everything at cards," Caleb said softly. The pieces fell into place like a bitter puzzle. They'd already forced him to sign. The game was just for show. Anna turned away, pressing a handkerchief to her mouth. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs as she realized the full depth of her father's manipulation. How he'd been driven to sell not only his land, but his own daughter. That evening, as purple shadows crept across town, Anna walked alone to the mission cross that stood on a small hill overlooking the valley. The wooden beam rose stark against the sunset sky, weathered by years of sun and storm. Caleb found her there, kneeling in the dust. "I'll testify," she said without turning. Her voice was steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "I'll tell them everything I know about that night, about the railroad men who haunted our ranch. Even if it shows what my father became at the end." "It'll be hard," Caleb warned gently. "Folks don't always want to hear truth when lies profit them better." "I know." Anna touched the rough wood of the cross. "But I won't let them destroy your name to hide their sins. My father's memory is already stained. Perhaps the truth is the only way to set things right." They stood together as darkness gathered, watching lights flicker to life in the town below. Each window seemed to hold both promise and threat, like stars trying to shine through storm clouds. Tomorrow would bring its own trials, but for now, they found strength in shared purpose and the quiet witness of the mission cross. Morning sunlight filtered through tall courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the wooden benches. The room smelled of dust and tension as people filed in, their boots echoing on creaking floorboards. Marshal Ephraim Gage stood near the judge's bench, his badge catching the light as he shuffled through papers. Caleb sat straight-backed in the front row, his hat respectfully placed in his lap. Anna perched beside him, her simple blue dress pressed clean, hands folded tightly in her lap. Pastor Wainwright sat on her other side, his Bible open but unread. Judge Harrison entered, his black robes sweeping behind him. The room rose and settled again at his gesture. "This hearing concerns the death of Ezekiel Talbot and related land disputes," he announced, his voice filling the quiet chamber. Marshal Gage stepped forward, boots clicking on the planked floor. His questioning of Caleb started gentle but grew sharp as steel. "Strange coincidence," he drawled, "how you just happened to win Talbot's daughter the night before his death." "No coincidence," Caleb answered evenly. "I sat in that game aiming to keep my peace, nothing more." "Yet Talbot ended up dead," Gage pressed, "with no witnesses but a mountain hermit and a desperate girl." Before Caleb could respond, Anna rose suddenly from her seat. Her voice trembled but held firm. "I would speak, Your Honor." The judge nodded, and Anna walked to the front, her steps steady despite the weight of every eye upon her. She raised her right hand and swore to truth. "My father," she began, her clear voice carrying to the farthest corner, "was once an honest man, but drink and cards ate away at his soul like rust on iron." She drew a deep breath. "That night he wagered me at cards to settle his debts, not to Mr. Harwood, but to men who'd been pressing him for months." A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd. Women clutched their shawls closer, men shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Caleb Harwood won that hand," Anna continued, "but he didn't claim me as property. He offered shelter when I had none, protection when I was afraid." Her voice grew stronger. "If anyone killed my father, look to those who drove him to such shame, not the man who showed him mercy." Pastor Wainwright stood then, gesturing to Gray Elk, who waited quietly in the shadows. The Apache elder moved forward with dignified grace, his presence commanding immediate attention. "I have known these valleys longer than any here," Gray Elk stated, his English careful and clear. "I witnessed Ezekiel Talbot make promises to my people, promises broken when railroad men filled his pockets." He produced worn papers from his coat. "These show the true agreements, signed in good faith. Compare them to your new deeds." The judge examined both sets of documents, his expression growing grave. "These signatures differ considerably," he noted. "I must postpone judgment until experts can verify their authenticity." He looked hard at Marshal Gage. "And I want a full investigation into these railroad dealings." Outside the courthouse, the late afternoon sun painted the sky in shades of violet and gold. Townsfolk gathered in small groups, their whispers now tinged with sympathy rather than suspicion. Several nodded respectfully to Caleb as they passed. Anna and Caleb walked slowly toward the church, the cooling air fresh after the stuffy courthouse. They stopped beneath an old oak tree, its leaves rustling softly overhead. "I believe God sent you that night," Anna said quietly, looking up at him. "Not just to spare me from shame, but to show me that good men still exist in this world." Caleb removed his hat, holding it against his chest. Words failed him in the face of such faith. He could only bow his head, humbled by the trust she placed in him. Pastor Wainwright offered them shelter in the church barn for the night. The simple space smelled sweet with fresh hay, and through the slats, they could see stars beginning to pierce the darkening sky. Anna sat on a wooden crate, a borrowed lantern casting soft light across her features. For the first time since that fateful night in Bear Gulch, she smiled, Not the cautious half-smile of someone expecting pain, but the free, unburdened smile of one who had found safe harbor. The lantern's gentle glow touched their faces as they shared a simple supper of bread and dried fruit. Neither spoke much, but the silence between them had changed, no longer weighted with uncertainty, but comfortable as an old quilt. In that peaceful moment, with cricket song drifting through the barn's open door, they found a measure of grace neither had thought possible just days before. Spring crept into Bear. Gulch like a gentle tide. The morning frost melted earlier each day, and green buds dotted the valley's cottonwoods. During that hopeful week, Caleb found himself drawn into the rhythm of town life, though his thoughts often drifted to his quiet cabin in the high country. Each morning, he joined Pastor Wainwright on the mission roof, replacing weather-worn shingles while hymns drifted up from the schoolroom below. Anna's clear voice led the children in their letters and numbers, her patience earning their trust. Sometimes Caleb paused in his work just to listen, a warmth spreading in his chest that had nothing to do with the spring sun. "You're a changed man, Brother Harwood," Pastor Wainwright remarked one afternoon, wiping sweat from his brow. "The Lord works in mysterious ways." Caleb only nodded, focusing on the nail he was driving. But he couldn't deny the truth of it. The weight of solitude he'd carried for so long had begun to lift, like winter snow melting from a mountain meadow. The judge's verdict arrived by courier on Saturday morning. Caleb stood in the marshal's office as Gage read the official document aloud. In light of new evidence and testimony, Caleb Harwood is cleared of all charges in the death of Ezekiel Talbot. The marshal folded the paper with a grunt. "Reckon I owe you an apology, Harwood." "No need," Caleb replied quietly. "You were doing your duty." That evening, the town gathered for Sunday service. Lanterns cast a warm glow through the church windows as Pastor Wainwright spoke of redemption and new beginnings. Caleb sat in his usual back pew, but his eyes kept finding Anna in the choir, her face bright with song. After the final hymn, as folks filed out into the cool evening air, Caleb waited by the church steps. Anna emerged last, having helped put away the hymnals. She smiled when she saw him, and together they began the walk toward her borrowed room at the widow Miller's house. The cottonwoods lining the street were heavy with spring blooms, their sweet scent filling the air. Scattered lanterns lit their path, casting pools of golden light. They walked slowly, neither wanting the moment to end. "I never thought to find peace here," Caleb said at last, his voice rough with emotion. "Figured my soul was too worn for such things. Too worn for—" He trailed off, unable to speak the word that filled his heart. Anna stopped beneath a lantern, its light catching in her hair like a halo. She turned to face him, her eyes soft with understanding. "Love finds worn souls easiest," she said quietly, reaching for his hand. "They know its true worth." Caleb's fingers trembled as they interlaced with hers. He bent down slowly, giving her time to turn away if she wished. Instead, she lifted her face to his. Their kiss was gentle as a prayer, sweet as spring water. When they parted, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "I reckon God knew what he was about that night in the saloon." "He usually does," Anna whispered back, smiling. But their newfound peace proved as fragile as the cottonwood blooms overhead. Dawn had barely touched the eastern hills when thundering hoofbeats echoed through Bear Gulch's empty streets. A rider from the telegraph office pounded on the marshal's door, then Caleb's boarding house room, bearing an urgent message. Caleb unfolded the telegram with dread, reading the stark words. "Railroad syndicate swears revenge for hearing outcome. Armed men headed your way. Exercise caution." He dressed quickly and hurried to the widow Miller's house, where Anna was already awake and reading by lamplight. Her face paled at the news, but she showed no fear. "We'll go to my cabin," Caleb said, pacing the small room. "It's defensible, hard to find if you don't know the way. We can wait there until tempers cool." Anna nodded, already reaching for her shawl. "I'll pack what we need." They worked quickly in the growing light. Caleb borrowed a pack horse from the livery stable, loading it with supplies, while Anna gathered food from the widow's pantry. Pastor Wainwright met them at the edge of town, pressing a small Bible into Anna's hands. "Go with God," he said solemnly. "I'll send word when it's safe to return." The sun had just cleared the horizon when they rode out, following the winding trail toward the high country. Anna sat tall in her saddle, showing no regret for leaving the town's comfort behind. Caleb led the way, his rifle across his lap, alert for any sign of pursuit. As Bear Gulch disappeared behind them, Anna urged her horse alongside his. "I'm not afraid," she said firmly. "Not with you." Caleb reached across the space between them, squeezing her hand once before returning to the reins. Together they rode on, climbing steadily toward the timberline where his cabin waited, while behind them spring bloomed in the warming valley. The journey home stretched before them like a familiar prayer. Under cloudless spring skies, Caleb led their small party along the winding trail toward his mountain sanctuary. The packhorse plodded steadily behind them, laden with supplies from town. Fresh green aspen leaves whispered overhead, while patches of stubborn snow still clung to the shadowed hollows. Each evening, they made camp beside the rushing river. Caleb showed Anna how to build a proper fire against the mountain chill, his rough hands gentle as he guided hers in striking flint to steel. The flames painted their faces gold as they shared simple meals of beans and coffee. On the first night, Anna sat close to the fire, wrapping her shawl tight against the cooling air. "I've been thinking," she said softly, "about teaching up here. The settler children need schooling, and the Apache families too, if they're willing." Caleb nodded, stirring the coals. "Plenty of room to build a proper schoolhouse come summer. Pastor Wainwright would help, I reckon." "And the cabin?" Anna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Could use some feminine touches," Caleb replied, his eyes warm. "Been too long without laughter in those walls." They spent the next 2 nights similarly, sharing dreams in low voices while owls called from the darkness. The future they sketched was humble but bright. Gardens to plant, children to teach, a life built on something stronger than fear. On the 3rd afternoon, they finally crested the last ridge. Caleb's cabin stood just as they'd left it, weathered logs solid against the mountainside. The sight of it brought relief to both their hearts. "Home," Anna breathed, and the word hung in the air like a blessing. While Caleb tended to the horses, Anna swept the cabin clean and unpacked their supplies. She found flour and dried vegetables in their saddlebags, enough to start a hearty stew. Soon, savory steam filled the small space. Caleb spent the rest of that day on the roof, replacing worn shingles and patching holes. The steady rhythm of his hammer echoed through the timber. Below, Anna hummed hymns as she worked, her voice carrying up to him on the spring breeze. Life settled into simple patterns over the next few days. Mornings began with coffee and scripture, shared over the rough-hewn table. Caleb split wood and hunted, while Anna tended the cabin and mended their clothes. Each sunset found them sharing quiet prayers, grateful for another day of peace. But on the 5th evening, as purple shadows lengthened across the yard, Caleb spotted movement at the tree line. A lone rider sat motionless on horseback, watching the cabin. The last rays of sun glinted off something metal, perhaps a rifle barrel or spyglass. Caleb lifted his own rifle slowly, more from habit than intention. The figure remained still, making no hostile move. After a long moment, the stranger wheeled his horse and disappeared into the gathering dusk. "Someone was watching?" Anna asked when he told her, her hands stilling on the quilt she was patching. "Railroad man, most likely," Caleb said. "They're known to hire trackers." Later, while Anna prepared their supper, Caleb checked the property. Near the tool shed, he found fresh boot prints in the soft earth. Not his own broader tracks, but the narrow imprints of town boots. The sign was clear. They were being watched, studied, measured for weakness. That night they sat closer than usual to the hearth's warmth. Anna opened the Bible Pastor Wainwright had given her, its pages still crisp and new. Her voice was steady as she read from Psalms. "The Lord is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in him will I trust." Caleb listened, letting the ancient words wash over him. When Anna finished reading, they spread their bedrolls side by side near the fire. The cabin's familiar creaks and settling sounds surrounded them as they drifted toward sleep. "I'm glad we're here together," Anna murmured, her voice already heavy with drowsiness. "Me too," Caleb replied softly, reaching across the space between them to squeeze her hand once. Soon their breathing fell into the deep rhythm of sleep, while outside a quarter moon sailed between wispy clouds. Neither of them knew that the watcher had already marked their habits and defenses, planning the moment to strike. The cabin's peace, hard-won and precious, hung as delicate as morning frost in the mountain air. Smoke crept beneath the cabin door like a serpent. Caleb jolted awake, his lungs burning. Orange light flickered through the wall chinks, not dawn's gentle glow, but hungry flames devouring the logs. "Anna!" He scrambled across the floor, shaking her shoulder. "Fire!" She woke with a gasp, coughing in the thickening smoke. Caleb wrapped his coat around her and grabbed his rifle. They stumbled toward the door as burning timbers groaned overhead. The night air hit them like ice water. Snow crunched under their feet as they fled the inferno. Behind them, their home became a torch against the star-filled sky. Gunshots cracked through the darkness. Bullets thudded into snow and wood around them. Caleb pushed Anna toward the trees. "Run!" More shots forced them apart. Through the smoke and shadows, Caleb glimpsed horsemen emerging from the timber, their dark shapes circled like wolves. "Caleb!" Anna's scream cut through the chaos. He spun toward her voice, but riders had already flanked her. Strong hands dragged her onto a saddle. She fought hard, kicking and twisting, but they bound her arms. Caleb fired his rifle, but the horses were already wheeling away. He sprinted to the barn, nearly falling on the icy ground. His horse stood ready, sensing danger. He swung into the saddle without touching the stirrups and spurred hard after the kidnappers. The chase led down treacherous mountain trails. Branches whipped his face as he pushed his mount faster. The raiders' hoofbeats echoed ahead, growing fainter. His horse's breathing turned ragged, steam pluming from its nostrils. They reached a steep ravine. His exhausted horse stumbled, legs trembling. The animal's knees buckled, and they went down hard in the snow. Caleb rolled clear, but his horse lay heaving, spent beyond rising. "No, no!" He struck the ground with his fist. The raiders' sounds had faded to nothing. Only the wind remained, carrying the distant scent of his burning cabin. Dawn found him searching through the ashes of his home. The roof had collapsed, leaving black skeleton beams pointing accusingly at the sky. He sifted through the ruins with numb fingers until he found Anna's shawl, somehow spared by the flames. Nearby lay a small brass token, its surface gleaming dully. "Railroad and Riverboat Company." The sight of it broke something in his chest. All his careful plans for their future, the school, the garden, the laughter they'd dreamed of, reduced to cinders and cruel metal. He fell to his knees in the ash, clutching Anna's shawl to his face. His shoulders shook with silent grief. When the tears finally stopped, Caleb buried what remained of his life here. He dug a shallow pit and laid the burnt timbers to rest, covering them with earth and snow. Then he walked away, leaving his rifle propped against a tree. Days blurred together as he wandered the high country. Sleet stung his face, but he barely felt it. He moved without purpose, eating nothing, sleeping only when exhaustion dropped him. The mountain's vast silence matched the emptiness in his heart. On the fourth day, as he staggered near the timberline, a familiar voice called out, "Brother." Gray Elk sat on his pony a few yards away, his face lined with concern. The Apache elder dismounted smoothly and approached. "You walk like a man already dead." Caleb couldn't meet his eyes. "They took her, burned everything. I failed to—" Gray Elk's hand gripped his shoulder, warm and solid. She breathed still. Evil has not won yet. The words pierced Caleb's fog of despair. He looked up sharply. "How can you know?" "The raiders passed our hunting camp 2 nights ago," Gray Elk said. "They rode toward the railroad camp at Eagle's Bend. A woman was with them, fighting still." Hope flickered in Caleb's chest like a tiny flame. His hands stopped shaking. "She's alive?" Gray Elk nodded. "The railroad men take her as bait, thinking you will come charging in with guns. They wish to finish what the fire began." "Then I'll give them what they expect," Caleb said. "Better me dead than Anna captive." "No." Gray Elk's voice hardened. "That path leads only to more graves. We must be smarter than violence. Come, we will make better plans over food and fire." Caleb hesitated, then nodded slowly. The ember of hope in his heart grew stronger. Anna was alive. Nothing else mattered. He would find her and make things right, not through bullets, but through wisdom. He followed Gray Elk down the mountain, leaving his grief behind in the falling sleet. Together, they would find a way to bring Anna home. Gray Elk led his pony south along the muddy river trail, reading signs most men would miss. Caleb followed close behind, scanning the banks where winter's grip loosened its hold. Their horses' hooves splashed through half-frozen puddles, leaving ripples in the clouded water. "Here," Gray Elk pointed to deep prints in the softening earth. 6 horses passed yesterday. 1 carries 2 riders." He dismounted, touching the torn grass beside the tracks. "They move fast, but the weight slows them." Caleb's jaw tightened. Anna. He pictured her bound on a stranger's saddle, enduring every jolting mile. They followed the trail through stands of bare cottonwoods. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across patches of lingering snow. Where the river bent sharply east, Gray Elk raised his hand for silence. Ahead stood an old trapper's cabin, its log walls gray with age. "We rest here," the Apache elder said. "Night brings better chances." Inside the cabin, dust covered everything except fresh rat tracks. Caleb gathered pine splints while Gray Elk started a small fire in the stone hearth. The flames cast dancing, shadows on the walls as evening deepened outside. Caleb split several branches with his knife, carefully stripping the bark. His hands worked steadily, wrapping the ends with strips of cloth torn from his spare shirt. "These will burn slow," he said, setting the makeshift torches aside. "Might need them." Next, he fashioned snares from leather cord and bent twigs. Gray Elk watched with approval. "Good. A hunter thinks beyond his rifle." The elder's face grew serious in the firelight. "The railroad men camp near the old ferry landing," he said quietly. "I heard talk in town. They wait for men from the south. slave traders who cross the border at night. His voice carried deep disgust. They plan to sell the woman far from here, where no law reaches. Caleb's hands stopped moving. The thought of Anna vanishing into that darkness made his chest ache. How long? 2 days, maybe 3. Gray Elk added a stick to the fire. We must move carefully. These men expect violence. They watch for it. They slept in shifts through the cold night. Dawn found them riding again, following the river's winding course. By mid-morning, Gray Elk spotted smoke rising above a grove of cottonwoods. They dismounted and crept forward on foot. Through gaps in the trees, Caleb counted 4 men around a campfire. 2 more stood guard near a canvas-topped wagon. His rifle felt heavy in his hands as he took aim at the nearest man. But something stopped him. The memory of his last killing rose up. The weight of it, the way it had haunted his dreams. He had promised himself and God no more death by his hand. He lowered the rifle slowly. Gray Elk nodded in approval. Justice that spares life cuts deeper, the elder said softly. It forces men to face their shame. They retreated to safer ground to wait for darkness. Caleb used the hours to study the camp's layout, marking each guard's position. When night fell, he moved silent as a shadow through the trees. The camp had grown quiet. Only one man sat awake by the dying fire, passing a bottle between his hands. Caleb crept past him toward the wagon. Through a gap in the canvas, he saw Anna. Her hands were bound, but her spine stayed straight with quiet dignity. As if sensing his presence, she turned her head. Their eyes met through the darkness. "Caleb," she whispered, hope flooding her face. A guard's boot scuffed nearby. "Quiet in there," a harsh voice commanded. Caleb melted back into the shadows before the guard could spot him. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with fierce joy. Anna's whispered name told him everything. She had not given up hope. She trusted him to find a way. He made his way back to where Gray Elk waited with the horses. The Apache elder saw the new determination in his face. "She's alive," Caleb said softly, "and now she knows we've come." He laid out his weapons on a blanket, the torches, snares, and rifle. "Tomorrow we free her, but not with bullets." Gray Elk smiled in the starlight. "Tell me, your plan, brother." They bent their heads together, speaking in low voices as the river murmured beside them. Through the trees, the raiders' campfire burned low, unaware that justice approached on quieter feet than violence. Dawn crept over the river valley in wisps of pale fog. Caleb crouched at the water's edge, watching the mist curl between the cottonwoods like ghost breath. The raiders' camp lay quiet except for one guard pacing near the wagon where Anna waited. He touched the rough-wrapped torches in his coat. The damp air would work in his favor. Smoke would hang low, thick and disorienting. Gray Elk had positioned himself upstream with Caleb's horse, ready for what would come. Moving like a shadow, Caleb gathered dead grass and branches into small piles along the riverbank. The dried tinder waited for flame. He struck a match against his boot, and the first pile caught with a soft whoosh. Then the next, and the next. Soon, thick smoke rolled downstream toward the camp. The guard noticed first, shouting alarm. "Fire! Fire in the timber!" Men scrambled from their bedrolls, grabbing weapons. Caleb heard their boots pounding past as they ran to check the smoke's source. The wagon guard hesitated, torn between his post and the threat. "Go!" someone yelled. "Could be Apache." The guard cursed and ran toward the smoke. Caleb waited until his footsteps faded, then slipped from the mist like a spirit. The wagon's canvas glowed pale in the gray light. "Anna," he whispered, pulling back the cover. She lay bound but alert, her eyes bright with hope. "I knew you'd come," she breathed as he cut her ropes with his knife. The hemp parted with soft snaps. "Can you run?" She nodded, rubbing life back into her wrists. Caleb helped her from the wagon, and together they darted for the tree line. The fog was starting to lift, sun warmth burning through the gray veil. They were 20 yards from safety when a shout split the air. "There, by the wagon!" The rifle crack came instantly. White-hot pain blazed across Caleb's shoulder, spinning him sideways. He stumbled but kept moving, propelled by Anna's grip on his arm. "Keep going," he gasped as she half-dragged him toward the cottonwoods. Another shot kicked dirt by their feet. They reached the trees as Gray Elk's smoke signal bloomed against the lightening sky, 3 sharp puffs of white smoke rising above the valley. The agreed-upon signal that would bring help from the mission and town. Caleb's legs gave out behind a fallen log. Blood darkened his coat sleeve, but the bullet had only grazed him. Anna tore strips from her skirt to bind the wound. "Just hold still," she murmured, working quick and sure. Her hands were steady despite the shots still cracking through the trees. More smoke signals rose, answering Gray Elk's call. The raiders saw them, too. Boots crashed through brush as the gang began to scatter, abandoning their camp rather than face whatever force approached. "Their papers," Caleb said, suddenly. "The ledgers." "I'll go." Anna was gone before he could protest, slipping through the gray light like a deer. She returned minutes later, clutching a leather-bound book to her chest. "Found it in the wagon. Has the railroad's mark." Caleb sagged against the log, strength draining with his blood. The morning sun finally broke through, burning away the last of the fog. In the distance, hoofbeats approached, the mission patrol responding to Gray Elk's signal. "I didn't win you, Anna," Caleb whispered as she cradled his head in her lap. "Truth is, I was the one rescued. You showed me mercy's better than vengeance." She smoothed his hair back, tears mixing with the rain that had begun to fall. "Hush now," she said softly. "Just rest." Her voice lifted in quiet prayer, thanking heaven for deliverance as the gentle drops washed the morning clean. Through blurring vision, Caleb saw Gray Elk emerge from the trees, leading others to their hiding place. The elder's face showed quiet pride. Justice had been done without a life taken. As Caleb's eyes drifted closed, he felt Anna's tears falling warm against his cheek, each one a blessing. The soft rain continued to fall, carrying away the last traces of gun smoke and fear. In its gentle music, Caleb heard the whisper of grace, not just for Anna, but for his own worn soul as well. The afternoon sun warmed the weathered boards of Bear Gulch's courthouse as townsfolk gathered to witness justice. 2 days had passed since the rescue at the river, and now Marshal Gage led a line of shackled railroad men up the dusty street. Their fine suits were torn and muddy, their faces drawn with defeat. Inside the packed courthouse, Pastor Wainwright stood before the judge's bench, the recovered ledger open in his careful hands. Caleb sat in the front row, his bandaged arm resting in a sling. Anna's fingers were laced through his good hand, her touch steady and sure. "If it pleases the court," the pastor began, adjusting his spectacles, "these pages tell a dark tale of greed and corruption." His clear voice carried to every corner as he read aloud damning entries, dates, amounts, threats made to Zeke Talbot and others. The evidence mounted: forged land deeds, extortion of desperate ranchers, bribes paid to local officials. Whispers rippled through the crowd at each revelation. When Pastor Wainwright described how the railroad men had forced Zeke into deeper debt until he wagered everything, including his own daughter, faces hardened with anger. The judge, a stern-faced man with silver hair, studied the ledgers carefully. "The evidence is clear," he declared at last. "All railroad claims on these lands are hereby null and void." His gavel crack echoed like thunder. The townspeople burst into applause. Several came forward to shake Caleb's hand, praising his courage in facing the raiders without bloodshed. Others approached Anna, admiring her strength in testifying about her father's sins while still honoring his memory through forgiveness. As the afternoon light softened toward evening, Caleb and Anna walked with Pastor Wainwright to the parsonage. The valley stretched before them, bathed in golden sunset light. Spring flowers dotted the grassy slopes, and birdsong filled the warming air. Inside, they gathered around the pastor's table for a simple supper of bread, stew, and fresh coffee. The familiar sense of home and hearth wrapped around them like a blessing. Anna's eyes sparkled as she passed Caleb the bread basket. "You know," she said with a gentle smile, "I reckon the Lord took quite a gamble on both of us. And won." Caleb's laugh started soft, then grew until it filled the room, deep, genuine, and free from the shadows that had haunted him for so long. It was the first time he had laughed like that in years. The sound of it brought tears to Anna's eyes. Pastor Wainwright smiled over his coffee cup, watching them with fatherly affection. Outside the window, the valley glowed with the day's last light. The distant peaks stood peaceful against the crimson sky, and the evening breeze carried the sweet scent of spring renewal. In that moment, as shadows lengthened across the parsonage floor, peace felt more than possible. It felt real, as solid as the bread they broke together, as true as the love that had brought them through darkness into light. The mission church glowed in late morning sunlight as townsfolk gathered for the wedding. Wild roses climbed the weathered walls, their pink blooms nodding in the spring breeze. Inside, sunbeams streamed through simple glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across the wooden pews. Anna stood before the small mirror in the back room, smoothing her cream-colored dress, sewn from fabric the ladies of Bear Gulch had gifted her. Her fingers trembled as she pinned her mother's lace collar at her throat. Outside, she could hear the murmur of voices as people filed into the church. Settlers in their Sunday best, Apache families in traditional dress, miners and ranchers with freshly scrubbed faces. Pastor Wainwright knocked softly. "It's time, my dear." The wooden doors opened wide, and Anna walked down the aisle on the pastor's arm. Caleb waited at the altar, tall and straight in his new black coat. His eyes never left her face. The sight of his gentle smile made her heart soar. Gray elk stood beside Caleb, dignified in ceremonial buckskins, eagle feathers in his silver hair catching the light. The old friends had spent weeks together rebuilding Caleb's cabin, making it stronger than before. When Anna reached the altar, Caleb took her hands in his. His palms were rough from working wood, but his touch was tender. Pastor Wainwright began the ceremony, his words echoing off the high beams. "Love is patient, love is kind." After they exchanged rings, simple gold bands bought with honest work, Gray Elk stepped forward. He draped a hand-woven blanket across their shoulders, binding them together. His deep voice carried through the hushed church. "Mercy is the strongest mountain. It stands when storms pass, shelters those who seek peace, and its shadow falls gentle on the valley." Tears gleamed in Anna's eyes as Caleb kissed her. The congregation erupted in cheers and blessing songs. Children scattered flower petals as the newlyweds walked out into the spring sunshine. They mounted their horses, Caleb's steady bay and Anna's gentle paint mare, gifts from grateful townspeople. The wedding party followed them up the familiar trail toward the high country, where their new home waited. The cabin rose proud against the tree line, fresh-cut timber golden in the afternoon light. Together, they had built it larger than the old one, with wide windows to welcome light and a covered porch for summer evenings. Above the door, Caleb had carved deep into the lintel, "Redeemed by grace." As guests gathered in the yard, children from the mission darted between adults, their laughter bright as bird song. Tables groaned with wedding feast dishes, venison stew, fresh bread, pies, and Gray Elk's gift of traditional Apache ceremonial cakes. The celebration lasted until sunset painted the peaks purple. Gradually, guests departed down the mountain, leaving behind blessing gifts, quilts, cooking pots, a rocking chair for the porch. The last riders disappeared into the gathering dusk, their lanterns bobbing like fireflies through the trees. Night settled soft around the cabin. Through the windows, lamplight spilled warm across the fresh-hewn walls, turning the new wood to honey. Anna moved about the kitchen, humming an old hymn as she put away food and straightened chairs. The familiar tune filled their home with quiet joy. Caleb stood in the doorway, watching her. The sight made his heart full. Her graceful movements, the glint of her ring in the lamplight, the simple rightness of her presence in their home. After so many years of solitude and grief, the world finally felt complete. The evening breeze carried the scent of pine and wild roses through the open door. In the distance, a whippoorwill called. Anna came to stand beside him, and together they looked out at the stars brightening over their mountain. Her head rested against his shoulder, and his arms circled her waist. "Welcome home," he whispered. She smiled up at him. "We're both home now." Inside, the lamp burned steady and bright, its glow a beacon of welcome in the gentle dark. The cabin that had risen from ashes now stood as testament to love's power to rebuild, restore, and redeem. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.